Hi, everybody. Dr. Vardy here. Excited for week 5. Is that what we're on? Holy cow. Week 5 of our English 5830 narrative medicine course. In this video, I'm going to be talking through a few logistical things, some housekeeping issues, and then we'll get right into our mini lecture for this week where I'm going to go over the readings. So first, really quickly, a couple of things have come up just in my communications with some of you, emails, running into people in the hall, of that sort of thing, which is so lovely. By the way, don't forget thing number 1, I do have office hours in my physical office, Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2. So if you're available at that time and you'd like to come talk, chat, ask questions, anything, please feel free to take advantage of that time. Okay, so in some of my convos with folks, a couple of things have come up. First of all, I just thank you for your patience as I continue to get caught up with the grading. I'm hoping to get through all the creative responses that are outstanding this week. And to that end, I'm also trying to keep up with the reading discussions. Please do make sure that you are posting at least your first post by Friday, maybe Saturday. But please do not save your reading discussions to all happen on Sunday. I know that does work for some folks, like maybe that's just how your schedule works, but there are other folks who are perhaps in your small group who don't have Sunday availability and so can't sit around all day waiting for the discussion to unfold. I'm hoping that it can unfold over the course of several days. So please do keep that in mind and try your best to be posting your first entries to your reading discussion by Friday. Thank you so much. Another thing to be thinking about or to kind of address is that I have been posting mostly vocal recorded comments on your creative responses. And I have mentioned that using your creative responses as drafts or seeds of stories would be a great idea as you work towards your creative writing portfolio. I'm going to post a little video that kind of just walks through that assignment, as I don't believe I've done that yet. But please be aware that you do have a creative writing portfolio coming up. It's going to be due in a couple of weeks. So if you haven't been thinking about what creative writing pieces you would want to have revised or somewhat polished to include in that portfolio, please do begin thinking about that because it's one of the ways that we are practicing what Rita Charon calls representation in this class. So also creative writing is just fun. So do let me know if you have any questions about revising your creative writing pieces, if there's any comments that I am giving to you on those creative responses. Please let me know if you have questions or want to continue that dialogue. Okay, so now I'm going to move into our mini lecture. We're going to be talking about voice and embodiment, which are fun topics, I think. And we can all relate to them because we all have bodies and we all have voices. So when it comes to voice and embodiment within the realm of narrative medicine, particularly, that is what we're going to be focusing on because I am well aware, and you might be too, of large bodies of literature that deal with both of these concepts in terms of literary criticism, in terms of rhetorical analysis and identification, in terms of just theorizing voice and embodiment. There is a lot out there, but we're just going to be thinking about it in terms of narrative medicine. In other words, the telling of and the listening to of stories about oneself in relation to care, and particularly medical care, though that term care is a little more fluid. But one of the things that's addressed in this week's readings in particular is this idea of the reliability of the narrator. And in a medical context, you can imagine how many issues that causes. Phelan says all narration is subjective, but only some is unreliable. So that is going to be the tightrope that we want to be walking as we think about narrative reliability in a medical or clinical or caregiving encounter, and how it is always subjective and embodied and going to be told with a certain amount of authorial choice. But that doesn't make it unreliable. And specifically, because embodied folks are more prone to be seen as unreliable narrators, we want to make sure that we are also considering and contending with issues of justice and injustice. So Olszewski, pronounce it correctly. Olszewski et al. Maintain that if we are serious about promoting justice, it is imperative that we use our power and privilege to learn the skills needed to address racism and center systemically oppressed voices. So, with those two thoughts kind of setting the stage, we'll talk a little bit about Phelan. Phelan's chapter here is incredibly rich. And of course, it's a chapter out of his rhetorical approach to narrative medicine book writ large, which is super rich and complicated in and of itself. But here, Phelan is talking about voice in narrative, and he's going to talk about how this gets dealt with and considered from both a literary studies and a rhetorical perspective. And I really like how he threads the needle here in not pitting the two against each other. This isn't literary criticism versus rhetorical perspective, but actually he kind of shows how rhetorical approaches to voice are standing on the shoulders of literary theories and actually just sort of maybe taking them from a different angle, mainly in considering the dynamic nature of rhetorical theory. So that is to say that rhetorical scholars like myself think about any communication, any exchange of meaning as a constantly moving and dynamic situation that's always in flux. And so that's kind of the main idea that we want to keep in mind as Phelan shows us and points us the way through several examples of this sort of fluid changing nature of authorial voice and narrator voice. So on that line of thinking, Phelan's also going to talk about the idea of story versus the idea of discourse. Story being the what is being said here. Sometimes in rhetorical theory, we would call this the content. But since we're really just sticking to the one genre of a narrative, we can say, what is the story? And then we can contrast that with the discourse at play. Now, discourse itself is a very sticky term that has a lot of theorizing around it. But here, Phelan is meaning discourse with a little d. So those of you who've read James Paul G, just set G over to the side here for a minute. And we're just thinking about the how, the construction, the tone, the how of the storytelling. So there's many ways to tell a story. And Phelan talks about this in terms of roles that can be analyzed within or outside of a story. So we have the authorial telling. So this is what the author wants to say, the writer. Then there's the narrator telling, and Phelan talks about how this has been really emphasized in quite a lot of modern and postmodern literary critical theory, the narrator telling, but there's also character tellings that are not the narrator's point of view. So there's many ways to tell a story in terms of how narrative is read. And I find it really helpful that he starts to break down for us these different ways that a narrator can become unreliable to us. They can misreport or they can underreport information. They can misinterpret or underinterpret information that they are given within the narrative, or they can misevaluate or underevaluate. So they can not do the right thing in terms of the meaning or the ethics of the information that they've interpreted. And another super helpful thing, and maybe if you're going to take anything away from this Phelan chapter, is that there are two ways that he's identifying that you can, as a narrator, talk about your experiences. You can use what Phelan calls the experiencing I. So that is in the mindset of when you as a person or your narrator as a character is right then in real time experiencing something. Or you can take what Phelan calls the narrating I, which is when you as the writer or your narrator as the narrator is talking about an experience after the fact, or as the narrator who now can reflect on that experience. So the experiencing I is a little more immediate, and the narrating I can come in with a little more wisdom or reflection or just explanation for the reader. Now, all of this theorizing and breaking down of how we can identify narrative voice when we do a close or rhetorical reading, all of this is what Phelan gives us. Olszewski et al. Give us the practical application for why we should be able to quickly and efficiently identify what is happening with narrative voice in a caregiving encounter. So they are coming at a clinical experience. They're going to tell a little story, and they're going to present it as evidence to support their argument that we need to adopt more counter storytelling and centering of marginalized voices in the clinical encounter, especially in order to avoid furthering the oppression that's happening for oppressed folks. So, quick definition, and this happens within like the first two sentences of the article, that counter storytelling is a tool to contradict and expose. So it's both truth telling and resistant in nature. And it's resisting and exposing oppression in a dominant narrative by focusing intention and centering the stories of the silenced, the ignored, the oppressed. And so this is how we can, as clinicians, as caregivers, or as writers who are interested in social justice, particularly in the medical field, we can move from this, I think, Dr. Vardy thinks, this mythical stance of objective and academically neutral stance that many in the medical field take for granted that that's their stance, but toward one of advocacy and activism. Because Olszewski et al. Do argue that there is no such thing as taking that neutral stance, and that often when you do that, or you say you're taking a neutral stance, what you're actually doing, though you may not be intending it or wanting it, is furthering and reinscribing the oppression. So what do? Well, Olszewski et al. Say that the main two steps, and they kind of demonstrate this as they tell a little narrative about a particular clinical encounter in the meat of this article, is that first we have to recognize that there are possibly two narratives happening. The dominant narrative and a counter narrative, that they might be existing and running opposite each other. Then, if we can critically examine the factors that are driving that dominant narrative, in other words, interrogate why something is reasonable, sensible, likely to be believed over something else. What are the assumptions that are happening? Then we can get at that centering work that we want to do. Okay. So the other two readings that I have here for you are these are our readings that I'm intending to be sort of like more creative examples or storytelling that we can experience as a model. So these are two examples of embodied experience that for both of these writers, they are working to center the narratives. So Esau McCaulley is an author and a professor, and has written widely about his experience as a Black scholar, as a Black theologian. And here he's actually taking a turn. This book is called How Far to the Promised Land. And this is Dr. McCaulley's memoir. And this is a place where, in the introduction, which I invite you to read, I included the introduction, the first chapter, and the second chapter in this PDF that's linked in Canvas, but you only have to read chapter 2, as you can see on the Canvas site. If you do read the introduction, you get the sense of why Dr. McCaulley is taking on this task of writing a memoir specifically. Mainly that he wants to narrate his own experience as a Black man growing up with a lot of what might be considered cliche experiences, which were, of course, exacerbated by racism, but in such a much more complicated way than what often gets portrayed in the larger discourse of national politics, for example. And so this is a really nuanced approach to telling one's life that is tightly interwoven with Dr. McCaulley's experience of being a Black man in the United States. So that is one example of telling one's story and acknowledging both the embodiment and the delicate dance of counter storytelling. The other piece is a chapter from Rebecca Tausig's memoir, Sitting Pretty. And so she is an author and a teacher who is narrating her own experience of being paralyzed and the identity conflicts that she experiences due to ableism. So this first chapter is fascinating because it really sets the stage for what she's going to be talking about in the rest of the book, which I recommend if you have extra time and want to read about it. But she's really talking about how, again, nuanced and unclichéable her experience is as somebody who has grown up her whole life with out the ability to, fully use her legs to stand or to move around, but how it's not her experience growing up just being paralyzed that caused the challenges for her, but rather the sort of cultural expectations of what an ideal body looks like and how that ideal body should be engaged with in the world. Anyways, they're both really great examples of self-narration, the voice here. You can actually kind of go through one of your reflective journal prompts is going to kind of ask you to think about these in particular ways, but they're both great examples of like a non-cliched representation of a personal story that's highly embodied in ways that are easy to stereotype, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to stop this share and say a couple more housekeeping things. One, I reminded myself, your reflective journals. I have the prompt posted And as you have been seeing, there's more than one reflective prompt. You are welcome, and I invite you to engage with them all, but you are only required to engage with one. So look through that list of reflective journal prompts that I have posted. And in the creative writing portfolio assignment video that I'm going to post in a little bit, I'm going to talk through what you're going to do with those reflective journals, because that's going to be a part of your portfolio. Okay, let me know if you guys have any questions. I hope you have a lot of fun engaging with these readings this week. I will talk to you guys later. Bye, everyone.